The allegations Meghan has made are simply not true. Her account does not reflect what actually happened, and it has led the public to a deeply misleading impression. That version of events has no basis in...
The announcement lasted barely minutes, but its meaning landed like a royal thunderclap. Before cameras, officials, and an audience expecting a routine statement about Diana's legacy, William revealed a decision nobody believed would be made so openly. Meghan's name was being removed from the Diana Memorial Fund's Honorary Association, effective immediately. No private warning softened the blow. No carefully negotiated compromise preceded it. And as the words settled, one uncomfortable truth became impossible to ignore. This was personal. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William kept his voice controlled, but the words carried more force than anger could. In this dramatized account, the Diana Memorial Fund was a charitable legacy structure created to preserve the humanitarian memory of the late Princess of Wales, making every connection deeply symbolic and personal. When the prince declared that Meghan's name had been removed from its records and future commemorative material, there was no room for confusion. The decision was final and public. Meghan saw the statement moments later. She read it once, then again, as if the second reading might reveal a softer meaning. It did not. Her expression hardened, then fell still. Harry watched her lower the phone onto the table, and the silence between them became heavier than any argument. She looked directly at him and asked, "He did this publicly?" The humiliation behind it was unmistakable. Harry felt the old wound open at once. Diana was not simply a royal symbol to him. She was his mother, and any fight involving her memory carried emotional weight no palace statement could contain. He saw William's move as more than administrative housekeeping. The future king had chosen the phrase, "protecting the integrity of my mother's legacy," avoiding a direct attack on Meghan while making the judgment behind the removal painfully clear. The wording sounded measured. The message beneath it did not. Charles received the final briefing shortly before the announcement. The king read the page in silence, then set it down without comment. A royal briefing was the written summary, preparing senior family members for a major decision. He understood why this one mattered. Diana's memory now sat at the center of another fracture between his sons, and the monarchy could not separate institutional consequences from family pain. Meghan's shock hardened into a more dangerous question. What had happened behind closed doors that made William believe public removal was necessary? But before anyone could understand why he had crossed that line, they had to understand exactly what Diana's legacy represented to the four people now trapped inside its consequences. For William and Harry, Diana was never merely history. She was grief, memory, identity, and the unfinished conversation that followed both brothers into adulthood. That was precisely why Meghan's removal carried such extraordinary force. William believed he was defending something sacred. Harry believed something sacred was being used against his wife. And Meghan, caught between those convictions, suddenly understood that her name had become attached to a battle that began long before she entered royal life. William carried that burden quietly. To him, Diana's charitable identity was not simply part of royal history. It was one of the clearest ways his mother still seemed present in public life. The Diana Memorial Fund, in this dramatized account, was the charitable structure preserving that humanitarian legacy through approved projects, commemorations, and honorary associations. His concern was painful. If the fund's name became tangled in family conflict, then the work itself would be diminished. Meghan understood the symbolism because her own honorary connection had once represented hope. During a warmer period, when the Sussexes and Waleses appeared capable of standing together, that association had been encouraged as a sign of shared purpose. Now the same link had become evidence of how far relationships had fallen. Harry told her quietly that his mother would never have wanted her memory turned into a dividing line. Meghan agreed, but she also feared that an angry response would make William's judgment seem justified. William struggled in private with exactly that contradiction. Keeping Meghan's association risked sending a message he no longer believed he could defend. yet removing it meant confronting Harry through the most sensitive part of their shared past. Catherine saw the conflict before anyone else. After midnight, she watched him revise the announcement again and again, crossing out one sentence that sounded too sharp. He set the pen down and said quietly, "This has to be about Mum, not revenge." She understood then that the decision had already wounded him before it reached anyone else. Meghan learned something even more unsettling soon afterward. The removal had not been improvised in a moment of anger. A documented internal timeline showed that reviews, wording changes, and approval discussions had been unfolding for weeks. Harry read the sequence and felt the insult deepen, because every dated note suggested there had been time for someone to warn them. Meghan felt something colder. This had been planned, measured, and prepared. That buried timeline pointed backward toward one event no one could ignore. Weeks earlier, during preparations for a Diana commemorative ceremony, one private exchange had changed William's uncertainty into resolve. And once that conversation was understood, the public removal would no longer look sudden at all. Write a detailed script based on the outline provided for a royal monarchy documentary, using a bold, dramatic, and immersive storytelling approach. Tone and style: bold, cinematic, and suspenseful throughout. Narrative-driven, mystery, foreshadowing, emotional highs and lows. Never dry or biographical in style. No visual descriptions or scene directions. Mix short and long sentences to control pacing and enhance drama. Character rule: every major character introduced in a section must appear at least twice within that section. Never introduce a character and abandon them before the section ends. Name repetition rule: never use a character's full name or title more than once per paragraph. After the first mention, replace with pronouns or descriptive alternatives. For royal figures, use variations such as the Queen, /she, her, the monarch, William, the prince, he, the future king, Sophie, she, the trusted confidant, Camilla, she, the queen consort, Charles, he, the king, the monarch. This rule applies to every character across every section without exception. Sourcing rule: when a character reveals or breaks silence, always specify how. A private interview, a documented account, a recorded conversation, even if fictional. Never leave a revelation sourceless. Terminology rule: when any royal title, document, ceremony, or institutional term appears for the first time, include one plain language explanation before continuing. Never assume audience familiarity with royal terminology. Critical: terminology placement rule: never place a terminology explanation in the first 3 sentences of any section. The opening must establish emotion and momentum first. Terminology explanations belong inside paragraph 2 or later, embedded naturally within context, never as an interruption to the dramatic opening. Wrong approach: it was a declaration that shook the monarchy. The future royal order meant the planned structure of roles and titles. Nothing would ever be the same. Correct approach: it was a declaration that shook the monarchy. Nothing would ever be the same. Charles understood what the future royal order, the planned structure of roles and titles defining the monarchy's next chapter, truly meant for everyone in that room. Context rule: every section must contain at least 2 grounding details explaining why the moment matters, not just that it matters. Emotional stakes must be clear. Paragraph opening rule: no paragraph may open with a passive or explanatory construction. Every paragraph must begin with either a character in action or feeling something, a short punchy statement of consequence, a sensory or atmospheric detail that creates immediate tension. Wrong openings: a private palace briefing was supposed to be controlled, and that mattered, because briefings are where the situation had developed over time, and it was important to understand. Royal tradition dictated that. Correct openings: Charles knew every person in that room understood the weight of what was coming. The closed door changed everything. Camilla did not move. She did not speak. Engagement rules: use cliffhangers and foreshadowing to build suspense. No standalone endings. Every section must flow naturally into the next. Use bold dramatic phrasing at key moments. Contrast success with suffering, where relevant to deepen emotional impact. Language. Simple but powerful word choices. Conversational and immersive tone. Never formal, academic, or stiff. Vivid through word choice alone. Never through visual instructions. Format. Paragraph format only. No bullet points, no headers, no numbered lists in output. No outline headings in the final script. Follow the exact word count specified in the outline for each section. Do not reset tone between sections. Carry narrative momentum forward. Each section must feel like a continuation, never a fresh start. Insert outline here. Section 6. The inheritance begins to divide the palace. Word count, 440 words. Tone and style, uneasy fallout, sadness, shifting loyalties, intimate pressure. Hook, nothing had been distributed. Nothing had even been removed from the vault. Yet the inheritance was already changing relationships. Charles became quieter. Sophie became more guarded. Edward watched both of them carefully, aware that a decision made by a woman long gone was now rearranging emotional boundaries inside the living family. The danger was no longer the vault itself. It was the meaning everyone was beginning to attach to the person chosen to inherit it. Key points. Context. News of the private designation circulates among a tightly controlled group of senior household figures, creating immediate sensitivity over precedents and family interpretation. Context. The distinction between private inheritance and crown property becomes crucial because Sophie's legal entitlement cannot simply be absorbed into institutional ownership. Emotional conflict. Edward sees Sophie losing sleep over the implication that accepting the inheritance could be interpreted as claiming a special rank she never wanted. Emotional conflict. Charles withdraws from one scheduled family discussion after receiving a further inventory summary, revealing how personally the discovery is affecting him. Suspense/revelation. The preliminary inventory suggests the vault contains correspondence, personal jewelry, ceremonial keepsakes, and sealed family records, increasing the emotional stakes dramatically. Suspense/revelation. Sophie learns that one envelope bears a handwritten instruction, addressed only to her, prepared to be opened after formal recognition of her inheritance. Forward hint. Rather than open it immediately, Sophie asks Charles to meet her privately one more time, without bankers, secretaries, or advisors. Concrete moment. Edward wakes during the night and finds Sophie standing by a darkened window holding the unopened envelope. She tells him, "I don't think this was meant to make anyone feel chosen." Transition line. By morning, Sophie had made a decision. Before she read a single private word, she needed to look Charles in the eye and tell him what she intended to do. William had delivered the announcement, but the deeper machinery behind it had been moving long before the cameras arrived. Inside the fund's fictional governing structure, trustees had spent weeks debating a difficult question. Could Diana's charitable memory remain insulated from modern royal conflict, while carrying honorary associations that repeatedly generated controversy? Their answer would place enormous power in William's hands, but it would also leave him carrying the emotional responsibility for whatever happened next. William listened as the discussion became colder and more precise. The trustees, meaning the people charged with protecting the fund's purpose, public identity, and commemorative standards, were not there to settle family arguments. Their review focused on one question: whether honorary associations were beginning to distract from Diana's humanitarian mission. That distinction mattered because the fund existed to preserve her work, not to serve as another arena for conflict between living royals. The prince understood where the conversation was heading before anyone said Meghan's name directly. Recommendations called for a simpler honorary structure, fewer personal associations, and tighter control over future commemorations. He knew immediately whose removal would carry the greatest emotional force. Meghan's connection had become the most contested name in the review, not because her past work had vanished, but because every mention now pulled attention toward a family feud instead of Diana. Catherine noticed his hesitation after the meeting. She reminded William that having the authority to act did not make the personal cost disappear. He admitted that removing Meghan would wound Harry as deeply as any public decision could. She did not tell him what choice to make. Instead, she warned him that once the decision became public, nobody would remember the technical reasoning first. They would remember the humiliation. William was then given another path. The trustees suggested allowing Meghan's honorary association to lapse quietly, without announcement, confrontation, or explanation. For several moments, that option tempted him, but he rejected it. He believed silence would invite months of speculation, competing interpretations, and accusations of hidden punishment. If the connection was ending, he wanted the reason stated clearly, and the decision owned openly. The room emptied, but William remained behind. He held the unsigned authorization for several seconds, knowing that one signature would turn weeks of discussion into a permanent consequence. Then he lowered the pen and signed. In that instant, the institutional debate ended. The personal fallout began. Meghan soon faced a decision of her own. She could answer publicly, challenge the reasoning, and force another confrontation, or she could deny the palace the furious reaction many expected. The signature had closed one door, but outside those walls, the consequences were only beginning, and Meghan was about to decide exactly how she would meet them. The first instinct was anger. The second was disbelief. But by the time advisors expected Meghan to answer William publicly, something inside her had changed. A furious response would dominate headlines, deepen Harry's confrontation with his brother, and tie her name even more tightly to the very institution from which it had just been removed. So instead of exploding, Meghan chose something far more unsettling for everyone waiting on the next move. She became quiet, deliberate, and almost impossible to read. Meghan listened, as advisors urged an immediate rebuttal, defending her charitable record. A rebuttal, in simple terms, is a direct response intended to dispute an accusation or action. She understood why they wanted one, but she also understood the danger. Any rushed statement could turn Diana's memorial legacy into a public battlefield and make the humiliation larger than the removal itself. Harry wanted the decision challenged. He believed William had crossed a line by announcing it publicly, and doing nothing felt like accepting his brother's authority over a part of Diana's legacy that belonged to both sons. Meghan heard the anger in him, but her own reaction had shifted. She told him quietly that her dignity could not depend on whether William chose to restore her name. The words sounded calm, yet the sadness beneath them was unmistakable. Meghan opened the sharper draft on her phone one last time. It accused the palace of using Diana's memory to settle modern scores, and demanded an explanation. She read it, deleted it, placed the phone face down, and looked at Harry. "I'm not begging anyone to put my name back." He stared at her, torn between relief and frustration, because restraint felt honorable to her and unbearable to him. The response she finally approved was brief and controlled. In a documented written statement prepared for release, Meghan thanked supporters, reaffirmed her commitment to charitable work, and made no direct attack on William. More strikingly, she made no request for reinstatement. That omission changed the emotional balance. The prince had prepared for criticism, counterclaims, another public confrontation. He had not prepared for silence. William read the statement and paused. Her refusal to fight made the decision look less like a battle she had lost, and more like a connection she was choosing to release. Harry noticed the same shift, and for the first time his anger no longer pointed only toward his brother. It turned inward, toward the question of what he and Meghan were carrying from years of royal conflict. For the first time, the struggle stopped being about what William had taken away, and became about what Meghan and Harry were willing to carry forward. No trustees sat between them. No palace officials shaped the language. No microphones waited for a dramatic answer. Meghan and Harry were simply husband and wife, confronting what the decision had exposed inside their own lives. He wanted to keep fighting, because Diana remained inseparable from his sense of family and loss. Meghan saw something different. She realized that if every royal rejection became another battle, the institution would continue defining their emotions long after they had left it behind. Harry spoke first, And this time, the anger sounded more like grief. Anything involving Diana reached far deeper than an ordinary disagreement, because her memory remained tied to childhood, loss, and the bond he once believed nothing could break between him and William. Meghan listened without interrupting. She understood that the fight was not only about her removal. It was also about a son fearing that access to his mother's legacy was being narrowed by his own brother. Meghan answered carefully. Harry had every right to defend Diana's memory, she told him, but that did not mean her own dignity had to depend on remaining attached to a fund bearing Diana's name. An honorary association, in simple terms, was a symbolic connection showing public support or recognition rather than ownership or control. That distinction mattered now. She could respect what the connection once meant, without allowing its loss to define what came next. Harry finally admitted what had been sitting underneath his fury. He felt he had failed to protect her from another public rejection. Meghan did not dismiss the pain. She told him the announcement had hurt precisely because William made it public, turning a private fracture into a visible judgment. But protection, she said, could not mean winning every argument with the institution. Sometimes, it meant refusing to let the institution decide when they were allowed to feel whole. The choice became final when Harry reached toward the statement draft again. Meghan gently moved it away and told him they would not ask for reinstatement. Even if William offered to restore the honorary connection later, she did not want it back. The punishment had become something else: release. Harry stared at her, then slowly understood that challenging the decision would keep her tied to the very conflict she was trying to leave behind. Calm arrived without victory. Harry stopped pushing for reversal, and Meghan stopped measuring the moment by what had been taken from her. Yet beyond that private decision, William's announcement was already becoming something much larger. Their choice brought unexpected peace inside the room, while outside it, the story was becoming louder than either brother had anticipated. By morning, the dispute no longer belonged only to William, Meghan, or Harry. Diana's name had once again become the emotional center of a royal argument watched far beyond palace walls. Commentators debated authority. Supporters argued over loyalty. Critics questioned whether the announcement had protected a legacy or weaponized it. But one newspaper front page reduced the entire drama to a brutally simple image: William on one side, Meghan on the other, and Diana's name printed between them like a dividing line. Harry saw the coverage and felt anger return immediately. British and international outlets treated the removal as more than a technical change because Diana still carried decades of emotional meaning for millions of people. Palace communications, meaning the official statements used to explain royal decisions to the public, stressed that the move concerned the fund's future structure rather than Meghan's wider charitable identity. But that distinction was already disappearing beneath the headlines. Harry grew frustrated as commentators described him as fighting William through their mother's memory. He hated that framing, because Diana had become the language through which another family fracture was being understood. Meghan remained quieter. She had already chosen not to seek reinstatement, yet seeing her name repeatedly placed beside Diana's reminded her that silence could not stop the story from growing. William faced the same uncomfortable truth from the opposite side. A fictional morning edition carried the headline, "Diana's legacy divides the brothers again," with separate photographs of him and Meghan facing away from each other. He read the front page, folded the newspaper, and turned to Catherine. "Mum has become the story instead of the work," he said. She understood immediately. The decision meant to protect Diana's legacy had pulled that legacy deeper into conflict. Public emotion became harder to ignore outside Kensington Palace. A small crowd gathered near Diana's memorial garden and left flowers, with handwritten notes, focused not on Meghan, William, or Harry, but on the late princess herself. The moment carried a quiet rebuke. People were remembering compassion, while the family around her memory was being defined by division. Meghan saw images of the tributes and felt the argument lose some of its power. William saw them too, and reached a similar conclusion for entirely different reasons. Neither wanted Diana remembered primarily as the center of another royal feud. That realization did not undo what had happened, but it stripped away the anger and exposed what each person now needed to accept before the story could truly end. In the end, nobody got everything they wanted. William protected the boundary he believed Diana's legacy required, but doing so widened the distance between himself and Harry. Meghan lost an honorary connection that once represented acceptance within the royal world, yet discovered that refusing to fight for its restoration gave her something equally powerful: control over what she carried forward. And Harry was forced to confront the hardest truth of all, that honoring his mother could not depend upon keeping every old connection intact. William moved first to close the matter formally. He approved the final review and instructed the fund to focus future commemorations on Diana's humanitarian work rather than current royal associations. A formal review, in simple terms, was the documented process used to examine the fund's structure and confirm final decisions. The prince had turned a personal dispute into a settled institutional position, knowing the cost would follow him beyond the paperwork. Meghan received confirmation that the records had been updated and read the message without visible anger. She closed it, looked at Harry, and said, "Leave it there." Her decision was equally final. She would not request reinstatement, privately or publicly. What once symbolized acceptance inside the royal world no longer had the power to define her place outside it. Harry remained hurt by the way William had handled the announcement. Yet something had changed for either of them. He stopped treating restoration of her name as a test of loyalty to Diana. Continuing the fight now risked trapping his wife inside another royal argument. William signed the last approval page and sat with the consequence. He had protected the boundary he believed necessary, but there was no clean victory. The future king had gained control over how the fund presented Diana's legacy, while losing another piece of trust with Harry. Authority had solved the institutional question. It had not healed the family. Meghan's defining moment was not the removal itself. It was refusing to let that removal dictate her worth. William kept her name off the Diana Memorial Fund. She chose never to ask for it back. Harry stopped pursuing reversal. Neither side reversed course, and neither pretended reconciliation had happened. What began as a public act of removal ended as something more personal. William drew a boundary around his mother's institutional legacy, while Meghan drew one around how much power the monarchy would continue to hold over her emotions. The struggle was finished, and Diana's name was finally allowed to stand apart from those fighting around it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.